So thank you for joining me, everyone, for tonight's One Night Stand presentation. This is a series of presentations that we do at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, where we focus on one work of art and one artist for one night. Tonight, I'll be discussing Gil Batle's Illegal Tender from 2024, a plate created with self-hardening clay and hand-painted with acrylic paint by the artist. This is a recent acquisition to our collection, and it's actually currently on view in the exhibition A More Perfect Union, Political Art from the Collection, which runs until January 5th of 2025. So to give you a little bit of background on the artist, Gil Battle was born in 1962. He comes from a Filipino family, and he was born and raised in San Francisco. He now lives and works on a small island in the Philippines. He's had a pretty interesting life, and that manifests itself in his art. He actually spent 20 years in and out of 5 different California prisons, including San Quentin, Chuckawal, and Jamestown as well. He was inside for fraud and forgery, and he's now reformed. He's repentant for his actions, but he did say, quote, "In a twisted way, I saw it as art," end quote. What he was doing is he was forging his own traveler's checks and money orders, fake IDs, and even credit cards. So in a way, there was some artistic skill required for the kinds of illegal activities that landed him in prison. And his art often draws on his experiences of incarceration, and he frequently works to amplify the voices of other incarcerated individuals as well. After moving to the Philippines to rebuild his life as a free man, he was able to hone his drawing abilities that he's had throughout his life. But those also manifested themselves during his prison time as well. So this piece reflects on the ways in which he was able to use those artistic talents behind bars. As a self-taught artist, he used that sophisticated ability that he had to draw, and that led him to a clandestine tattooing practice while in prison. And so this plate that he's created here is depicting a homemade tattoo machine, kind of hidden away in a hollowed out book. And he also has indicated its component parts and kind of a whole story, a whole kind of barter exchange being represented on this plate's surface. So on the back of the plate, he's actually spelled this out for us, listing tattoo gun parts and each of those different component parts. And that's also represented on the surface of the plate. So here in this detail, pardon the shadow here, but an E guitar string was used. And he's talked about how this was often the hardest element to come by. Also included are these chess pieces, because they would use the soot from a burning chess piece to create the ink. This is the element that the artist found most interesting as he was learning how to put all of this together. So they would melt a chess piece and then use a paper bag or the bottom of a stainless steel table to trap the smoke and the soot. He would then scrape it off and mix it with an antibacterial lotion or shampoo to make the tattoo ink. Also required was a motor from hair clippers, but it could be from other things as well. Hair clippers are represented here. The actual machine that we're seeing there in our hollowed out book includes a toothbrush kind of bent over, as well as a pen shaft attached there, and a battery as well. And on the back of the plate, Battle notes that he made these tattoos for cigarettes and coffee, so trading for these small vices that he was able to access inside prison. And those things are also represented on the surface of the plate. So here you're seeing some steaming mugs of coffee. You also see these lines of cigarettes kind of twisting along the rim of the plate. So you see that there, and you also see that throughout the rim. Battle also created drawings for other inmates, often recreating family photos that had been taken without the incarcerated individual, and then placing their portrait back into the image. And so those drawings and his tattoo practice became these really important commodities for him that he could trade with others, like we already indicated for coffee and cigarettes, but also a whole host of any manner of materials as well. And perhaps more importantly, it became a way for him to earn respect and protection, and to a degree to be able to avoid some of the violence that plagues most prisoners' stay. The artist has said, quote, "The prison artist was a commodity. He was like a magician. Even the toughest convicts were in awe at the artist's skills. I was that commodity. The ability to draw, my age, and the fact that I was good at faking it, toughness, to make it, call it performance art, is how I was able to survive behind those walls. Nothing I'm proud of, but funny when I think of it now. I did tattoos in the joint, not daily, and I have to say that my skin art doesn't compare to my drawing patterns that I could sell in the joint. I drew daily, mostly tattoo patterns and portraits of family members on the outside. I would have the inmate pose for a sketch and include them in a family photo they had in possession, as if the inmate were there with them in the final drawing. I was pretty good at it too." End quote. The plate itself reminds us of this desire for self-expression in this very restrictive environment, as well as the ingenuity and the creativity that was required for our incarcerated individuals to be able to express themselves in that kind of environment. And though the artist feels that he has to kind of mentally go back to that space and that headspace in order to capture the feeling of being there, the work also serves as a reflection of his own healing through art and the gratitude that he feels when he looks up from his work and is no longer in that environment. He's actually talked about how art sort of got him through his prison sentence, and he looks at art as something that saves lives, and as he has said, as cheesy as it sounds, he feels that it has saved his life as well. This particular plate comes from a recent body of work that he's been creating just this year. Here I'm showing you some other examples of this kind of blue and white style of plate that he's been creating. The plate that we have in our collection, a legal tender, that comes from series one that he's created. Here you're seeing some examples from series two. And throughout these works, he's chronicling the inmate's perspective of the American penal system, drawing on his own stories as well as stories from other prisoners as well. So showing you a few examples of these blue and white plates. In this particular piece, you're seeing a shiv embedded in the ground, so a homemade prison knife. And sprouting up from that shiv are these morning glories. Around and behind that, you're seeing a prison there, along with this chain link fence, lines of men along the sides as well. Um, Something else that he often explores in his work are kind of cycles as well, whether that's generational cycles of trauma and abuse and how he saw those things as kind of leading to some of the experiences that he saw in prison. We also see some of that kind of cyclical imagery happening throughout his work as well, really tying some of these ideas together. And this particular work is called Dad's Belt, again from 2024, just this year. And then showing you the process of creating this type of work. So for this piece, 10-second shave, showing a scene in the prison yard, you're seeing a progression of how this is being created from kind of sketching out these different elements to adding in color and then finishing off with all of the shading completed and all of the details added back in. Battle also sometimes draws on the culture of the Philippines, which is both his heritage and where he currently resides. So in this particular piece, he's referring to cockfighting, which is a common pastime in the Philippines. And here we've got two embracing bodies of two roosters. Their feathers are merging together into this united belt, while their heads have been replaced with hands and interlocking pinkies, symbolizing a promise that the artist is making to himself to not kind of battle himself internally, making this sort of commitment to himself. And in the example of this plate, using the imagery of what's typically considered a blood sport to signify the artist's desire to commit to and fight for himself moving forward in this new phase of his life. He also works two-dimensionally as well in very detailed drawings. So the next two works that I'm showing you come from a series that he did, a very hyper detailed, kind of surreal playing card imagery. And these are referencing altered playing cards that prison gang members would use to secretly communicate with each other. So for this piece, you're seeing Five Eyeball Barbed Wire from 2017, and also Three Owl OG Old Gangster, also from 2017. But also in this two-dimensional format, he has also represented, again, the homemade tattoo machine, the prison tattoo implement. So again, kind of indicating these different component parts. He also spells that out in the text that surrounds the illustration in the center. This particular representation takes on a little bit more of a surreal quality. We have kind of very tiny figures that are enmeshed, wrapped up in those component parts of the body of the tattoo machine. So it takes on a little bit of a different tone, a little bit of a different vibe from what we saw with Illegal Tender, the plate that's in our collection. But perhaps what he is best known for are these carved ostrich eggs. He's actually received quite a bit of press for these eggs, especially when they were first exhibited a few years ago. And this came out of what he had started doing once he moved to the Philippines. He was first creating knickknacks for the tourist trade on the island. So making just little knickknacks, little kind of artistic implements. And one of the things that he was working on was painting small chicken eggs with these island scenes. And he ended up showing these to his family, and particularly showing them to his brother, who is also an artist, and he works in San Francisco. And his brother ended up suggesting moving to a larger canvas of the ostrich egg. And he also suggested that Gil should focus on his own life and his prison experiences rather than these kind of touristy scenes that he was creating. So that was kind of a revelation for Gil Batle, and something that he was kind of surprised to think about, that people could be interested in those experiences and seeing them represented in art. But that led him down this road of creating these carved ostrich eggs. So these are relief carvings, each with this kind of architectural structure of pictorial panels that are often supported and separated by very fine carved details, whether that's representing chain link fencing or razor wire or carved handcuffs. So across the center of the egg, there will often be horizontal bands, rectangular or circular or oval panels that frame images created in this kind of comic book realism style. Above and below those main central panels, there will often be bands of images. Sometimes there will be that kind of chain or razor wire or repeated motifs like knife-wielding hands. The artist usually cuts through the eggshell in places to emphasize these patterns and to reveal the empty interiors as well. These are carved using a high-speed dental drill, and each of the eggs is about 6 or 7 inches tall, about 5 inches wide, and the shell itself is about a 16th of an inch thick. Once he's completed the carving with the dental drill, he'll then touch things up with a small knife or a scalpel. Each of them takes about a month to complete. And to do this process, he first selects a theme, some sort of narrative that he wants to communicate on the surface of the egg. Then the first part of the carving is the most challenging. The eggs aren't perfectly symmetrical, and so finding a center line is really key to ensuring that the panels or the frames will fit parallel to the top and bottom of the egg. And it's also why the tops and bottoms are often cut out, because they don't meet perfectly to the axis points. So he'll pencil in these horizontal and vertical lines, and then that forms kind of like a grid or a guide for him to be able to start adding in the panels, getting them placed, and then starting to carve in these characters, symbols, icons, the scenes that he's creating on the surface. And these two, again, feature stories of incarceration and often reflect the men that Battle encountered while he was in prison. Oftentimes violent men or very regular men who made sad mistakes, the terrifying events that he witnessed, and also the bonds that can be formed under this type of very harrowing circumstances, all carved on the pristine surface of the ostrich egg. And that egg form, of course, is something that we often think of as being a manifestation of life and birth, and perhaps in this case, also a symbol of rebirth as well. And so, giving you some examples, I do have quite a few of these because they are so interesting to look at. But one of them that I wanted to touch on is again returning back to that imagery of our tattoo machine. So you'll notice that there are some themes that he does come back to again and again in multiple formats and in multiple different media. So this is Tattoo from 2015, again illustrating that homemade tattoo machine, but in this case also kind of expanding on that story, including typical tattoo patterns, imagery that he was asked for, things that he saw while he was in prison as well. The tattoo machine is framed by this handcuff shape that stretches up to these sort of medallions in the upper register above that tattoo machine image. With this piece, he's talked about how the motors for the tattoo gun also come from things like CD players and old cassette players and electric toothbrushes. Some prisons can crack down on tattoo guns, and in this case, the motors would be smuggled in, sometimes through the guards. So thinking about this whole kind of process and the ingenuity required to create the tattoo and the tattoo machine. In this example, he also returns to another set of imagery that we've kind of looked at before, different images that we're seeing here, but a similar idea. This is Kite Deck from 2017. And again, this is taking its name from the sets of altered playing cards that prison gang members would use for secret communications. So panels from the eggs are modeled after different card suits, and they depict, among other things, a doctor carrying a saw and severed limbs, a drug addict with a needle in his arm hovering above a spectral death, and up above, this braid of hungry serpents devouring one another and circling the top of the egg. Reception fresh fish, as thinking about the arrival and processing of new prisoners. Fraud is kind of an outlier because it actually deals with his own life, Battle's own life, his own transgressions, that idea of fraud being the thing that led him to prison, forging traveler's checks, money orders, and fake IDs. And here he depicts himself headless. So he's meant to be the figure that you're seeing there without a head, doing the tattooing there. And instead, he carves chameleons around that register on the top and then masks around the bottom register in order to represent what he has felt for himself was this kind of ever-changing self-identity during this time. Ghost communication from 2014 refers to unseen methods that prisoners could use to communicate, whether that was through things like toilet bowl plumbing, which you're seeing toward the top of the egg, hand signals, which you see on that top register there, coded letters, language, etc. And this was the way that information was passed between people, secret messages, communication, coordinated events could be communicated through these kind of secret channels. And it was a way that prisoners would kind of find out if something was about to happen in the prison yard. It was ways like this that would be communicated to them. Sanctuary comes from a series of eggs, and those depict Battle's sentiment that whether they're locked up or back on the streets, Convicts are never free from fear, as he says. And one last example here, cicada nymphs. In this example, he's combining the idea of the insect, the cicada, burrowing underground for 13 to 17 years before emerging to mate. And he's conflating that with the idea of the prisoner as well, and how people on the outside can view the inmate serving their very long sentence, but not really understand what's going on within the prison, what's going on inside of that system. Batle, having had the experiences that he has, is aware that everyone's story is different. And likewise, each face that he represents in something like a long chain of prisoners, kind of like what you're seeing toward the top register of this egg, where you're seeing this line of men along the top, each face will be slightly different. So he doesn't just do the same face over and over. Each is always a little bit different, even though they kind of maintain this expressionless form. When these were originally exhibited, they were shown under glass domes, often with magnifying glasses, creating the sense of them being almost like ancient artifacts to be explored with a magnifying glass, or something incredibly precious, like a Victorian keepsake, or even something like a Fabergé egg. These different kinds of associations that we have with a form like this, particularly something that is carved with so much detail, and is so delicate and so kind of finely created, we have all of these associations that come with that. And the same can be said too when we're thinking about the blue and white ceramics, going back to our illegal tender piece that we started with. And it's kind of unclear, he hasn't said anything specifically about other references that he's taking into account in the creation of that piece and that form that he's using. But it is very possible that he has in mind the blue and white ceramics that we're familiar with throughout history, originally invented in China and then widely circulated, copied, recreated by makers worldwide, and then becoming one of these very well-known and enduring products. Blue and white porcelain has this long decorative history in people's homes. At times, it was something very fashionable and a way to denote taste. And of course, it's also been appropriated and transformed into a part of many different cultures. Here you're seeing a couple of examples from a company in Denmark of a Christmas plate, and then of a blue fluted half lace pattern for a cup, saucer, plate, coffee pot, and cream pitcher as well. And so then it becomes something also very familiar, something that perhaps we've seen in grandma's curio cabinet as well. And so there's a really interesting juxtaposition between the content that's being expressed through these pieces and then the form that they're taking as well, whether it's the ostrich eggs or the blue and white ceramics as well. So it's this kind of interesting idea, and it makes you wonder whether that's on purpose, whether that juxtaposition is there in order to take these very disturbing, very harrowing tales and create something that has kind of a calming order to it, um, putting it into these very manageably controlled forms in order to help us be able to approach and understand it, and perhaps also help the artist in his own approach and understanding of what he went through as well. So really interesting things at play there, and a lot of interesting kind of references that we can think about too with decorative objects. So clearly, Battle is continuing to experiment with different forms while processing his lived experiences. And it will be interesting to see where he goes next. Like I said, this is kind of a recent form that his art has been taking just in this year. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see where he goes from here. I am going to stop there. We just did kind of a whirlwind about some of these different areas of his work, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I think that was wonderful presentation and fascinating work. The dichotomy of the ugly with the beautiful,
Mm,
and a beautiful expression of such pain and suffering.
yeah.
And I really appreciate you introducing us to this artist.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your comments. I'll also just mention, if you're interested, there are a couple of videos that you can find online of Gil Battle himself talking about his experiences. One is about 10 minutes, and it was produced by, I believe, his family, one of his family members. And it's all just in his own words, talking about his life, his history, and his progression to art. And then there's also a nice CBS News Sunday morning segment with Battle as well, which I think you can find pretty easily on YouTube if you just Google his name and find it there. So there are a couple of other resources to hear directly from the artist as well.